All right, so today we're going to be talking about why social credit, why Douglas social credit is not socialism. Right? One of the common misapprehensions that newcomers have when they come to the subject of Douglas social credit is that it must be a form of socialism. That's sort of the default. And I think it has to do with the mere fact that there's the word social in social credit. And some people sort of jump from, sort of guilt by association. Well, it's got the word social in it. It must be some form of socialism. As a matter of fact, Douglas social credit is not a form of socialism. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But not only is it not a form of socialism, it's actually anti-socialist. Now, this tendency is something you've observed in Australia as well, isn't that right, Michael? That people will automatically assume.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. It's a big problem here down under. You just really wonder about the intellectual state of people when they just automatically associate anything with the word social in it with socialism.
Mm-hmm.
It's a ridiculous and absurd way of thinking because, I mean, gosh, if we're pretty much we're socializing right now by talking to each other and to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in that case, if you think like that, then we might as well be socialists right now because we're socializing with each other.
Right.
If these people who think, oh, well, anything with the S word in it is socialist, well, in that case, according to their thinking, every person might as well just lock themselves up into a hermitage and not have anything to do with the outside world. Thus, no social life.
Right. So social just means of or relating to society, right?
That's right.
And in the case of credit, we're talking about social credit. We're talking about society's credit, real and financial. So yes, it's something that is a common misunderstanding. And I think, too, that people tend to assume that if you're criticizing the established order, well, you must be in favor of some sort of left-wing economic alternative, right? So there's that as well, that if you're not fully in line with the existing order, well, you must be a socialist. This is especially true in the United States and to some large extent in Australia, not as much in Canada, for various cultural and historical reasons. But when you talk about socialism, one of the problems with it is different people define it in different ways. Different people understand the concept in different ways. And so if you're going to say that social credit is socialist or it's not socialist, it behooves one to give a definition of socialism. And perhaps the broadest definition of socialism that we can come up with is the idea that a socialist economy is an economy in which the government is heavily involved, right? So in the extreme, if you had an economy where the government ran the economy, ran all aspects of the economy, well, that would be sort of the socialist extreme. You couldn't think of an economy that is more socialist than that. And when people criticize socialism, then they're criticizing an economic order in which the government plays a very heavy role, directly and indirectly, in running the economic system. So historically, socialism has been associated with things like the class struggle. We're talking particularly now about Marxist socialism. And, its advocates have defended the collectivization of the means of production, or the state ownership of the means of production, the command economy, where the government makes decisions about what to produce, how to produce it, and who's going to get paid for what, and so forth. And it's also heavily associated with the welfare state and all the bureaucracy and heavy taxation that implies. and it's been associated with heavy regulation, lots of red tape. So you've got those various aspects of an economy that is, dominated by the public sector. And what we're saying is that, if that's what socialism is, well, social credit, Douglas social credit, is not in favor of the command economy, right? We don't believe that the government should be setting or determining economic decisions, right? We're in favor of free enterprise, personal initiative, the profit motive, provided it's honest and functional, and the market mechanism, right? And when it comes to things like heavy taxation, well, Douglas is on record as saying that taxes are way too high. And if we had the social credit financial system, financial reform in place, and we can get into this a bit more later, we wouldn't have to have such high taxes. People would be able to keep more of the money that they earn. Okay? And similar observations could be made with regards to the class warfare. We don't believe in dividing, let's say, labor and capital for each other. We want to enfranchise everybody as shareholders in their economic associations. So we're not playing divide and conquer games. And we also are not in favor of excessive regulation or the nanny state. Right? A certain amount of regulation is necessary for health, safety reasons. Also, of course, we want to regulate the financial system so that it's an accurate system, a fair system that will enable economic association to fulfill its true purpose, the delivery of goods and services that people need to survive and flourish with the least amount of labor and resource consumption. So there's a place for regulation, but even there, the idea is that if we regulate the regulator of economic activity properly, if we regulate money and ensure that it becomes an accurate tool for representing our physical economic potential and actual wealth, then we won't need many of the other regulations which currently hamper the system. Because very often these other regulations are there to sort of mop up or manage the difficulties that are caused by a dishonest, dysfunctional financial system. So, you can go right down the list and look at all these characteristics of socialism, of an economy that is run by the government or that involves heavy government control and direction. And in no way does Douglas social credit tick off any of those boxes or qualify as a socialist system.
That's right.
I don't know if you wanted to add anything to those observations.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, Oliver. The Douglas social credit would, as you say, still preserve things like the right to private property, ownership of private property, and free enterprise, particularly small business enterprises. They would still be recognised. Still be recognised. There are different classes of society, different people with different dispositions, different groups that by nature form within human societies, but instead of promoting class warfare and division and driving wedges between classes, it would, the Douglas social credit, at least the idea is to encourage collaboration and solidarity between the different classes of the given society.
That's right. And the primary way of doing that, of course, would be to give everyone a dividend, because what that does is it links economic destinies together, right? If we, as a society, do well, we produce what we need efficiently, then the gap will be larger, and each of our dividend payments will be proportionately greater than if we don't cooperate effectively for the common good. Yes. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep. Go ahead. Anything else?
Well, another point I would make is that when the Douglas social credit speaks of the word social, it does teach or promote the idea that that there are certain things, or promote the reality for that matter, that there are certain things in society, in the community, that by nature have a social nature.
That's right.
Must have a social nature, like money, for instance. Money is a social good, and human societies and communities throughout, ever since the beginning of mankind, they by nature have a social nature.
That's right.
They have to work together. They have to form communities, form political and class structures in order to coordinate and work together to provide the food, the shelter, protection, security, and defense of the community. They can't just all be these selfish, isolated islands without any connection to their community or their fellow man. They have to pull together. They've got to work together.
Right.
And so therefore there has to be a degree of social organization. With Marxist socialism, really, the problem with that is that it's to the excessive, extreme end of the social end of society. So basically, its idea is to just collectivize all private property and production. So it's all is to be owned by the state.
Right.
And that, of course, is injurious and destructive towards the freedom of human beings. So there needs to be a degree of individuality, but there also needs to be a degree of social organization. There must be a balance. The two must work together.
That's right. The two must work together.
You can't just have wholesale Marxist socialism where everything is collectivized and state controlled, and at the same time, on the other extreme, you can't just have every person is basically an island, and there's no social organization or social organization of necessary goods or services that are best managed by the public power.
Right. Well, that's right. So in the case of Marxist socialism and other forms of socialism to a lesser degree, what happens is the individual becomes subordinated to the group. Right? The individual, his interests, his desires, his freedom, his resources, everything is sort of subordinated to the group. And Douglas holds, and this is also something that is part of Christian thinking, that all groups and all group associations exist to serve the individuals who make them up. So, and you're quite right, we do need the group for the sake of securing the common good, but the purpose of the group is actually to serve the individuals who make it up, not this individual or that individual or this class of individuals, but all individuals, each individual, right? So, so we'll come back to the other extreme in a minute. I just wanted to mention, because we don't want to alienate either side of the conventional spectrum here, unnecessarily or inadvertently. We've come out pretty strong against Marxist socialism, against very aspects of socialism. But I'll throw the socialists a bone now and say there are many, many social and economic problems which socialists recognize, which we agree are real, authentic problems. So poverty is a definite problem under the existing system, right? Social exclusion, gross inequalities, exploitation, all these things are indeed features of the present economic system, and they are real problems that need to be addressed. We just hold that there are more effective, efficient methods of addressing these problems than, having Tax Freedom Day fall in the middle of June as it does in Canada, where you spend almost half the year working for the government, or situations where the government takes more and more control of the economy and stifles free enterprise. So, we're with them in terms of, yeah, there are problems. We're not going to bury our heads in the sand and say those things don't exist, or those things are we have to tolerate those things for the sake of the free market. Or no, those are real problems. When those problems exist, it's an indication that the economy is not functioning very well. It's not fulfilling its true purpose as effectively or as efficiently as the physical facts of the economy would allow. So, we're completely on side with that. We just hold that by introducing the monetary reform, which Douglas advocated, there's a more effective and efficient manner and fair manner of addressing all of those problems in a way that the socialists don't typically countenance.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I think the diagnosis that a lot of the socialists have for the systemic problems with the economic system is fundamentally a lot different to the Douglas social credit diagnosis, and that is that the socialists usually blame, say, the ownership, private ownership of or at least the monopolistic ownership of the private property and production. Thus creating the large gap between the rich and the poor, and the very existence of the different social classes and so forth. Otherwise, with the Douglas social credit diagnosis, is that the problem lies with the financial system, and as well the economic, financial, perhaps corporate monopolies of monopolies of private property and production. That, of course, is a problem. When you've got private property and production centralized in the hands of a few, that certainly is a problem that Douglas social credit recognizes. And also, perhaps one thing that socialists don't recognize is the fact that the financial system and the private banks and their monopoly of credit is really the chief and probably the biggest cause of root cause of our economic woes.
Yes, it's sort of shocking in a way that socialists of various stripes go on and on about this aspect of the problem or that aspect of the problem, and they blame, as you say, they blame private ownership. But very often, the one thing that they ignore, which is the key to the heart of the problem, is private finance, and especially international finance. They don't talk about the financial system. It's not on their radar, typically. They act as though finance is neutral, or it's got nothing to do with causing systemic problems in the economic system. So it boggles the mind, and there's more we can say about that. Whether we'll be able to say it tonight is another question, but it's just boggles the mind that they ignore this whole dimension of finance, money, etc. in trying to achieve a more just economic order. They act as though it's of no account, it's irrelevant, when in fact it is the one thing that needs to be properly rectified in order to solve any of the problems that they profess to be so concerned with.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're dealing with the financial system and the monopoly of credit, and especially if you ignore that reality, as a lot of the socialists do, then their attempts, such as the redistribution of private property and production, or the nationalization of the same, is really all it is doing is just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
it's ultimately not going to solve the problem.
Yes. Well,
Just nationalizing the problem.
The whole notion of redistribution, of course, rests on the acceptance of Say's law, right? You have to believe that whatever we produce, there's enough money being distributed in the form of income to offset the costs and prices of what we produce. It's just inequitably distributed, with the rich getting too much and the poor getting too little. So therefore, clearly, the solution is to take from the rich, whoever the rich are, give it to the poor, and the problem's solved. But what we as social creditors put into question is the very validity of Say's law. And we say, whatever we produce, there's not enough money being distributed in the form of income to offset the corresponding costs and prices. Not enough money automatically being distributed through the same processes of production to offset the corresponding costs and prices. And so you cannot, through redistribution, you cannot make an insufficient flow of income larger and large enough to balance out the costs and prices. It doesn't solve the problem. The problem is that there's a chronic deficiency of consumer buying power. And what is needed is the creation of additional purchasing power and its distribution to consumers, so that we can bring the aggregate level of consumer income up to the flow of corresponding costs and prices. So again, their conception, their proposals for how to address economic problems rests on assumptions which we hold are fundamentally incorrect.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
But those are actually assumptions which, ironically or not so ironically, they share with the laissez-faire capitalist types, libertarians, neoliberals, etc. They both assume that Say's law is valid, so they've got that in common. And this might be a good point where we can start talking about just a little bit. We probably should do a whole show just on why social credit is not laissez-faire capitalism. We probably will at some point. But just to sort of clarify things further and to reassure those people who do see problems with the other end of the spectrum, the laissez-faire capitalist side, social credit is also not a species of laissez-faire capitalism, because we do hold that there is a role for the public authority, not merely in furnishing certain public goods like the fire department or the police or the army or other forms of social production, but more specifically, there's a role for the public authority to regulate the financial system, to regulate the banks, to ensure that the financial system is serving the common good as best as possible. And so it's got to be within that framework of an honest financial system where the numbers reflect the physical reality. That's got to be the due parameters within which the market mechanism is going to function. And so we talk about this spectrum where you've got socialism on the left and laissez-faire capitalism on the right, and the mixed economy of one stripe or the other somewhere in the middle. And what we hold basically is that spectrum is fundamentally faulty, because in the case of laissez-faire capitalism, what ends up happening is the very sort of situation that you mentioned before, where productive property ends up under in a free market under free competition. It ends up being monopolized and concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. And so you end up with monopoly and oligopoly markets. And most people then have no meaningful ownership of productive property. And the only thing they can do to survive under the current system is to sell the one thing they own, their labor. And so we all end up sort of being wage slaves, to use socialist terminology. But the socialists, instead of finding a way to distribute ownership and productive property more equitably so that everyone at least has some minimum stake in productive capital and it can enjoy the benefits which accrue to that private productive property ownership. What they want to do basically is to have only one owner, the state, right? And so it's taking the tendency towards monopoly, which you find in laissez-faire capitalism, and just taking it to its logical extreme, where everything will be owned in the limit. Everything would be owned by the public authority and run by the public authority. So it's just more of the same. It's not really an alternative to the problems that we see with laissez-faire capitalism. Now, of course, there's classical distributism, where they do recognize rightly that ownership and productive property does need to be very widely and equitably distributed. But the ownership they want to distribute is a direct ownership, whereas social credit through monetary reform is proposing that if we recognize everyone as a shareholder in the country and we fill the recurring price income gap with the creation of new debt-free credit and distribute it to everyone as a dividend, then we're able to basically accord everyone an ownership in the private productive property, the communal capital, but it's a beneficial ownership. They don't have to be titular owners of a factory or be involved in the administration of a factory in order to receive their share in, let's say, the societal profit, right, and receive a dividend. So if we have to place social credit, Douglas social credit, in relation to the conventional economic spectrum, then it's obviously not on the left, and it's not on the right. It's not socialism, it's not laissez-faire capitalism. It also is not some conventional mixture of the two extremes. It is something which transcends that conventional paradigm entirely. And if we had to situate Douglas social credit in reference to that paradigm, we probably would say something like, we'd use the term the radical center and say that Douglas social credit, it's not left, it's not right, it's not the conventional center, it's the radical center. It transcends that false paradigm entirely and offers us a third alternative that is also something entirely new, and hence that's why I use the word radical, going to the root of the problem. Right? So that should be appealing to everybody, regardless of which side of the conventional spectrum they currently identify with. They should be able to see that there's a way of transcending and resolving these sorts of disputes in a way that everyone can be comfortable with.
Yeah, oh, that's right. It's Douglas social credit by placing itself in the radical center and offering solutions that would really be so beneficial to both sides, rather than just picking one side and duking it out with the other.
Mm-hmm.
It promotes solidarity and sympathy and solutions to both sides of politics that they both can agree on, more or less, and can put to rest and resolve this political economic gridlock.
That's right.
That societies are in now.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So now we probably will discuss this at some later date, but there's a reason why that gridlock exists. I mean, it's because what ends up happening is we end up with an economic system which basically privatizes profit and socializes loss. Right? We end up with a system that has combines the negative aspects, the worst aspects of both laissez-faire capitalism and socialism. And that's sort of from certain points of view, that you end up with living in the worst of both possible worlds. And
yes,
that's a huge danger. Of course, there are vested interests behind the system, particularly associated with the financial system, who benefit from that arrangement, and that's why they support both ends of the political spectrum. And it's the Hegelian dialectical trick: thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
That's it.
Right? So as long as you conceive of our political and economic options within that faulty left-right system of thinking, which goes back to the French Revolution, you'll never be able actually to encounter real solutions to our problems that actually resolve them once and for all.
Yes.
And we just have this interminable wrangling between right and left, and the rightist party has power. The rightist party, so-called, has power for a certain period of time. Then people get sick of them, they throw them out, and they put in the leftist party, and they hold power for a certain period of time. And back and forth we go, left and right, in this interminable swing from one side of the conventional political spectrum to the other. And yet the basic problems continue. The basic economic the insecurity, the inflation, the high taxation, there's not much deviation. We just keep going down that same road, and the end of it is not very pretty.
That's right. That's right. Really, they're just controlled oppositions. It's all just a controlled battlefield where both sides are set up by the same power. That's the financial oligarchs and the monopoly of credit to place the people into a state of class and political warfare to keep them preoccupied with supposed false solutions. Right. In perpetuity, perpetually switching between both the left and right-wing sides of politics, and to give you an idea just how well historically the financial oligarchs have done this. It was no less than the certain banking interests on Wall Street that bankrolled the Russian October Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia.
That's right.
So the money that came to bankroll that came from no less than the pretty much the center of modern capitalism. That's Wall Street.
Yes. Why would super capitalists finance communist revolutions? Things that make you go, Right?
That's it.
All of this, of course, is well documented in the work of Professor Anthony Sutton. They've got some YouTube videos of his widely available that people can consult if they're interested in that particular aspect of the problem. But yes, the end result is that the common individual ends up in sort of a pincer movement where he's squeezed by private corporations who take advantage of him in certain ways, whether as a worker or as a consumer, on the one hand, and on the other hand, he's squeezed by the government, the regulation, the heavy taxation. And in order to survive, where does he turn? Well, he turns to the financial sector. He gets loans, mortgages, and car loans, and student loans, and lines of credit, and so on and so forth. Because why? Because he can't live otherwise. He doesn't earn enough. Whatever he earns from the corporations or the employer is then taxed directly, indirectly so heavily that he's fit prey for a predatory financial system to harness. So that in addition to being a wage slave and a tax serf, he's also a debt slave.
Yes.
Beautiful, isn't it?
That's right. It's got to be it'd have to take an absolute genius to work out such an insidious and truly deceptive and wicked system such as that.
No,
just to control the masses so well.
Yes, it's diabolical.
Yeah, and take a lot of even global organization to make a reality.
True. So is there, we've covered a number of bases there. Is there anything you think we've missed, or is there anything else you wanted to add before we bring it to a close?
I think we pretty much covered all the bases, Oliver.
Okay.
Yeah.
At least.
What do you reckon? Anything else?
Well, there's certain things we could talk in greater depth about, but I think we've sort of given it a very broad sweep.
Yes.
And the takeaway is, look, although social credit has the word social in it, social credit is not only not socialist, because we don't support any of the measures that socialists typically defend, like the welfare state, heavy taxation, the command economy, collectivization of the means of production, class warfare, nothing like that. We're completely in favor of the market mechanism, provided it's properly contextualized within a regulated financial system. We have no problem with the profit motive, provided it's honest profit and functionalist profit. We have no problem with private property, either productive property or personal property. In fact, we want those things. We need those things. Those things are very important for a functional order, but they've got to be so coordinated that everyone benefits from those things, that society as a whole will benefit from these more personalistic, individualistic elements of the financial system. And if we had a social credit financial system, we anticipate, for example, that taxes would be much lower, because if people have a national dividend, for example, and they enjoy compensated prices, well, you wouldn't need so many social programs. You wouldn't need unemployment insurance. You wouldn't need pensions, public pensions. You wouldn't need other forms of social assistance, right? People would, whether they're working or not, everyone would have a dividend. Everyone would benefit from compensated prices. And that means in turn that the tax redistribution that's undertaken to fund those things would not be necessary. So that's why it's one reason why taxes would be lower. But another reason we could lower taxes, we wouldn't need all the bureaucracies that are currently set up to introduce, monitor, enforce compliance of all the rules that are necessary for welfare and unemployment insurance, and all these other programs that have been developed to sort of mop up the problems which free enterprise under monopolistic credit generates.
Yes. Oh, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really it's got to be the most effective solution, far-reaching solution that expands beyond or transcends the conventional political and economic spectrum.
Yes, that's right. So I think we'll bring it to a close there, and hopefully this will help to disabuse people of certain fundamental misconceptions, whether they're coming at this from the left or the right of the conventional economic and political spectra. And once we've sort of washed those misconceptions away, people will be in a better position to actually see and understand what Douglas social credit has to offer the world.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, take care, Michael, and we'll pick this up again next week.
Yes, you too, Oliver. Take care.
Thank you.